This is an issue, this critical race theory, that second only to the gospel is the most important issue of our time and for our community. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. But how many of you have heard of critical race theory? Almost everybody, right? How many have heard it maligned and saying this is socialism, Marxism, anti-Christian, racist? Turns out none of that is true. And to illustrate how important this issue really is, I want to ask a question. And that is, how many here love your mothers? Yeah, good. Almost everybody. All right. How many of you love your sisters? Wives, daughters, mothers-in-law? Okay, I don't want to ask that one. I'm sure everybody does, okay? But it turns out that black women are 6 times more likely to be killed in the United States than white women. And this is a recent study. And even worse is murder. Black women, black females are 6 times more likely to be murdered in this country than white females. And it gets even worse than that. There's some places, like in Wisconsin, and there's a sister here from Wisconsin, 20 times as likely to be murdered. And all the things that we're going to be talking about today bear on this statistic and make this horrifying statistic come to life. This is a statistic to tell you how bad it is. When's the last time that we heard this on CNN, MSNBC? What we're hearing about now is Donald Trump, and that's, I guess, newsworthy. Coming up dictatorship, that's newsworthy. But then we hear all this other stuff about LGBTQ and boys want to become girls and girls want to become boys. Somehow that is more important than black women and black girls being killed at 20 times the rate of white women. Why? Our women are invisible to the greater society for the most part. Our women, our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our wives are invisible. And it's time for that to change. So what we'll be discussing today is a number of topics. First of all, what is critical race theory? It's not some Marxist invention, but we'll find out that. Then a bit about what the history of it is. Documented examples, and these are going to be across all of society that we live in. Objections to it, and then how should Christians respond? As Bible-believing, born-again believers, how should we respond to this? And what does the Bible say about all of these things? So first, the thing is that critical race theory is a graduate law framework. And let's understand 2 things. First of all, unlike Ron DeSantis' claims and some of these other folks, it's not being taught in elementary schools. It's not being taught in high schools. It's not even being taught in college. This is a graduate level theoretical framework like the JD and PhD in law in some universities. So it's not being taught on every street corner like they're trying to say. Another thing too, it's important to understand what the word theory actually means in an academic setting. When we sit up, I have a theory about this, that means I have a hunch or a guess or whatever. But in an academic setting in universities, a theory is an idea, an explanation that has a mountain of evidence behind it that can withstand peer review, critical examination, and opposition, and still come up as being a viable explanation for why things happen. So that's what critical race theory is. And critical means to examine something, right? It doesn't mean to criticize it necessarily. It means to examine it and see what's underneath it, what's behind it, and what's really making it work. And what it does, it's based on, if you look at all the articles, videos, everything else, there's really 3 observations that critical race theory makes. One is that rules and systems can be racist, not just individuals. And the people who speak out against critical race theory try to act like racism is just an individual thing. And it's not. There are rules that we'll be seeing in entire systems, like redlining, for instance, or building freeways through black neighborhoods like what happened here in Atlanta and across the United States. Those are systems that are in place that are racist in and of themselves. Second is that rules, systems can be racist even if the individuals themselves are not racist. And one example of that would be, say, working in a bank. So you can have banks do redlining. There's certain places they loan, certain places they don't. You can be an employee at a bank who is not a racist, but they're following the rules, but the rules were determined by racists, and so the outcome is racist. A third thing is that racist laws and rules hurt people long after they're eliminated. So we don't have whites only signs anymore, but we have this mentality that people have about who they want to serve and who they want to follow around in the store to see if they're stealing something. And then redlining, yeah, it may be against the law to redline, but they've done it already. They got those systems in place and they're still hurting people. There are some biblical examples of all 3 of these principles. So for instance, number 1 is that law systems can be racist. It's not just individuals. We've got the Samaritan woman that Jesus asked for a drink. And this Samaritan woman said, "Why are you asking me for a drink? Because the Jews don't have any dealing with Samaritans. And so in that day, Samaritans were like, for the Jews, were like the N-word. They hated us. They hated Samaritans. They would spit on the ground when they said the Samaritan in the conversation. They would go around the Samaritan area to avoid crossing through it. And those systems were made by racist Jews, because the Samaritans were a mixed race people. They were part Jewish and also part Samaritan, and the Gentiles that were there before and after the exile. So this was an explicitly racist rule. It wasn't called that back then because they didn't actually have that word. And there were people that weren't feeling that way, that didn't have those attitudes, but they would be ostracized by their families if they tried to befriend a Samaritan or whatever else. So Jesus broke that norm. He broke that rule and asked her for a drink of water when he wasn't even supposed to speak to her, being a Jew. So laws, rules, and systems can have racist intent. Another one is that they can be racist even if individuals don't want them to be. And so we see in Acts chapter 6 about the Grecian Jews, who were, of course, non-Hebrews, and then the Hebrew Jews. When the first early church was getting together, that the Hebrew Jews who were running things were neglecting the Grecian widows in the distribution of food. Now, they didn't, these were born-again believers. They were filled with the Holy Spirit. This was right after the day of Pentecost. Everybody loved the Lord. But the way that they were thinking from the time they were young, they neglected. It wasn't like they were saying, hey, we don't want them Grecian widows to have any food. They weren't doing it on purpose. It's just the outcome of the way that they approach things. So even though they weren't intentionally to be racist, the outcome of what they were doing ended up that way. And the same thing happens today. And again, we've got the same nation, Israel, that is discriminating based on ethnicity in these different areas. And today we would call that racist. And it's, again, a solid scriptural principle, but it's something that our counterparts do not talk about and they don't want to acknowledge. So the third is that the racist rules and laws can hurt people long after they're eliminated. Peter went to go talk to Gentile believers, and the Jews were criticizing him, saying, you entered the homes of Gentiles, you even ate with them. What's wrong with you? But these were born-again Christians that have received the Holy Spirit, that believed in the same Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, resurrected from the dead. And those attitudes continued to hurt those people. And that's one thing is in terms of attitudes that people have. Another one is just the way of doing things, the old way. Doing new things the old way discriminates. So in the Bible's case here, they had these people in Acts chapter 15 that said, except you get circumcised the way of custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. They wanted to put new wine into old wineskins. This was a new message that Messiah had come, and that faith in Christ was what saved people, not the works of the law. But they wanted to go back to this works of the law because that's just the way they were thinking. So people's thinking, even after whites only signs and people can ride the bus together and all of that, the way that people think and see other people still impacts the way they treat those other people. And that's one of the foundations of critical race theory, and we see it in the Bible itself, because people as people have not changed. Times have changed, cultures have changed, calendars changed, where we live has changed, but people's nature hasn't changed. So we still behave the same way. And then again, it was a different nation, but it's the same faith. Now, the history of critical race theory, it actually started in legal studies from critical legal studies. And critical legal studies was like the 50s and 60s was a branch of legal theory that showed and studied how laws are not neutral, non-political many times. They many times have political outcomes. Our voter suppression laws that are happening now are really obvious examples of that. But there's other things too, like if the city wants to favor a developer, that's not a neutral process. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll drop, or even any government contracts, whether it's national, U.S. government, local government, they'll drop these contracts many times that only one, this is neutral contract. Anybody that can meet this and this and this and this criteria can get the contract. But there's only like one company that meets all the criteria. They have to have exactly 7,852 employees, make $100 million a year, and they have to be located on Buford Avenue in Atlanta. Any company, and have this address. And it's not necessarily that blatant, but the way that these contracts are made and the way that these rules are decided are often geared toward favoring certain people over others. So that's one thing that they were doing, was looking at the whole structure of law in the United States in particular and how that impacts different populations differently. Another one is that during the 70s, while this was going on, there were a group of scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, and some others that are listed here, and they were in different universities studying similar phenomena, and they were independently coming to very similar conclusions. And what they found was a focus on failed promises. So particularly in the 70s, there were all of these kumbaya type of equality, things going to be better, promises that were made. We're going to get rid of all of this discrimination, and we're going to treat people fairly. But those things were not being actually implemented. And they were wondering why. And they were looking at what it was underneath it that really caused all this. And they actually didn't stop at the 60s. They found the same pattern that went back actually all the way back to Reconstruction. Like after Reconstruction, there was about 20 years of good times where there were black legislators and businesses and towns and things. And all of a sudden, the Jim Crow laws started coming in. And so they were looking at these phenomena over a period of time from Reconstruction to today and coming back to focus on all these failed promises. And the name critical race theory was actually coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. They had this body of work and theory that they had been doing, these academic findings and all of these papers they had been writing, and they just didn't have a name for it. She coined that name and it stuck, and it was a good name actually. So now some documented examples, and this is really going to get into the meat of things. First of all, we can look at treatment by police. And these are different areas of society. This is in Aurora, Colorado, where there is a black woman and her 4 children, aged 6 to 17, face down on the pavement, surrounded by these police officers. And what happened was they had mistaken her license plate for a stolen motorcycle in Montana. And this is an SUV in Colorado. And they're talking about implicit bias and all this. And you look at this, and they've got these poor kids there, face down on the pavement in the hot sun. And you know that if this would have been a blonde white woman with her darling children, it never would have happened this way. Or it would have been very, very, very rare. And there's always going to be some little corner case where people can bring up and say, yeah, it happened to me too. They never even would have thought of doing that. It never would have entered their mind to do that kind of thing. But they did this to her. And the cops that did this never got charges. They were never charged with anything, and one of them even went on to run for sheriff. So it's not just there. There are just in arrests. There was a study in St. Paul, Minnesota, where they showed that black drivers got stopped 4 times as often as white drivers. And then a separate study at Stanford went, and they found that this discrepancy went away at night when they couldn't see the race of the driver. So when the race of the driver wasn't visible, the arrests were the same. But when they could see who it was, they got arrested 4 times more. Another one is just the whole criminal justice system. And here we see that black men, and this has been statistically studied by universities and even by the U.S. government, are receiving routinely more harsh punishments. Now, the Bible says, one law shall be to him that is homeborn and to the stranger that sojourns among you. But that's not what's being happened here, right? So in federal courts, the racial disparity, it said that for average sentences was 55 months for whites and 90 months for blacks. And these are for the same backgrounds, the same charges, the same criminal or lack of criminal history, often in front of the same judges. And not only that, University of Michigan, it said that black offenders were 75% more likely to face a charge carrying a minimum mandatory sentence than white offenders who are similarly situated. And this has even been studied again at the federal government level. And this is a study that was done by the United States Sentencing Commission across every jurisdiction, every legal jurisdiction in the United States. And they found that consistent with previous reports, meaning that this isn't the first time that they've seen this, and that isn't the first time that they've studied it, that black male offenders continue to receive longer sentences. And also, the second one here called non-government sponsored departures and variances appear to contribute significantly. It's a fancy way of saying that when there's leniency shown, there's not as much leniency shown. So there's stiffer sentences when they're handed out, and when leniency is given, there's less leniency for black offenders compared to white offenders. And these are similarly situated in terms of their prior history and offenses committed. Another thing, too, even though there's all of this stereotype about violent black people, violent black males, violent black females, and all of this, violence in a person's background does not statistically affect the outcome, meaning that it doesn't matter whether you're violent or not. Equal violence or equal lack of it still means a different outcome. So those stereotypes are just that. They're stereotypes that are invented to try to justify a lot of this stuff. School discipline. Students of color disproportionately suffer police assaults at school. Look at those words. Police assaults. Not just assaults, police assaults. Police assaulting children in school disproportionately happens to students of color. And that includes 6-year-old girls. They was in Florida. They had a 6-year-old girl in handcuffs, the police. I mean, that is just absolutely. There's nothing that I could think of that a 6-year-old girl could do that could warrant police handcuffing. Another thing, too, is that Black and Latino students, this is from Public School Review, this is a study across like 90,000 school districts across the United States, in at least 30 states, 97,000 public schools. So Black and Latino students consistently punished more severely than white students for the same infractions. Nearly 50% of preschool students suspended multiple times are Black. Yet Black children are less than 1/5, less than 20% of the population. These next two are really awful. Black students are far more likely to be referred to law enforcement, not the principal's office, calling the police. More likely to be referred to law enforcement or arrested by police for school-based offenses than white students or any other students of color. So this is something that's particularly targeting Black students, these police arrests. And then also, Black girls are suspended much more than girls of any other race. So it's not just law enforcement, it's in the schools that we send our children to. And of course, the predictable outcome is that Black students who suffer these unfairly harsh punishments tend to have lower grades. And that's no surprise. It's very discouraging to have this happen to you. It can be deleterious, ruinous to have it happen to you, but to see it to happen to people like you and not happen to anybody else, that's discouraging too. And it's depressing, and it is really difficult to concentrate and focus on school and academics and excelling in those things when you're afraid of this kind of thing happening to you or your friends. Medical treatment. There have articles out there where doctors say that in medical schools, not all of them, but too many, in medical schools, they are taught that Black people feel less pain than white people. So they are less likely, Black people are less likely, especially, to be given pain medicine, more likely to be left in pain, less likely to get pain treatment. And Black women in particular, I've heard from a number of them, about they're not listened to by their doctors, ignored. And my mother-in-law had an operation at Kaiser Hospital, and they sewed up a cloth in her belly. And then she started having these belly aches, and then they'd look and say, oh, there's a cloth in there, and they had to open her up to get it back out. And those sorts of things happen more often to Black patients than to white patients or any other patient. So the African-American medical community had an article that Black patients, understandably, fare better with Black doctors, with doctors who understand them, but more importantly, doctors who care. I've had good and bad experiences with Black doctors too, and other races of doctors, but it's really the proportion of doctors who care about the patients that makes a difference. And if doctor cares, then things will go well. But more doctors won't care about Black patients than is true about white patients or other patients of color. Bank loan. The mortgage denial rate, trying to get a house, is twice that of the overall population for Black borrowers versus others. And here, it's over 1.5 to 2.5 likely to be denied as white applicants with similar observable borrower characteristics, check this out, in all neighborhood types. So it doesn't matter whether you're living in a low-income minority neighborhood or want to move to a high-income white neighborhood, you're less likely to get a loan. Or if you want to live in a high-income minority neighborhood, low-income white neighborhood, less likely to get a loan. Twice as less likely. And it's not just mortgages, but businesses. So credit given to businesses is going to be half as likely to be fully financed. The Black businesses more and Black Latino businesses are less than half as likely to be fully financed for a loan application. So not only you don't get the loan, but when you get the loan, it's not as much as you need compared to the other population. And then all of a sudden, then they'd start crying about, what are you complaining about? This is why. Housing appraisals. This couple is across the Golden Gate Bridge from where we live. And this is a couple in Marin County. It's an affluent county. And they were lowballed on a housing appraisal. They sued and they won, which is great. That ought to happen a whole lot more. But the magnitude is really what's striking here. Their housing appraisal went up by $500,000 when they took their things out and put white people pictures in and had their white friends pretend they owned the house. That same company came back, reappraised the house for $500,000 more. What kind of impact would that make in our home? And this is something that is not a one-time incident. They ended up suing and winning, which is wonderful, but this is something that is pervasive. So the New York Times, widespread racial biases found in home appraisals. Freddie Mac finds pervasive bias in the home appraisal industry. And of course, Freddie Mac is the one from the government that gives out the loans. And so it keeps going that even the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is monitoring to try to protect homeowners from discriminatory loan appraisals. And $500,000 is no chump change. So it's not just that, it's also hiring and promotion. This is not just affecting Black people, it affects other minorities as well. So here's a quote from an Asian woman who's a surgeon. She's a 45-year-old surgeon. And so at age 45, she's been probably practicing surgery for 10 or 15 years easy. People look at the color of my skin and automatically start doubting my ability and my knowledge of the job. They don't interview me and doubt it. They automatically. I've had more than one time where I walked in, like there was this guy one time, I was going in for a job interview. He was looking down at his desk. It was time. So he was looking down, smiling like crazy, looking at my resume, right? Smiling like crazy. He looked up and saw me and his face just changed. It was like the devil walked in. And the interview didn't go well and I didn't get the job. And I'm glad. So that sort of thing happens, and this is an Asian woman surgeon, and this is supposed to be the preferred minority or model minority in some people's minds, but they deal with it too, just not as much as we do. Another thing is that STEM jobs, right, the science, technology, engineering, the Black people in their job are concerned with diversity and discrimination in the workplace. And one thing that happened at the company where Brother Rich and I worked, I was in product management, and I was in large-scale data systems, and this was in core development for a large database company, and I was there about 20 years, and the whole time I was there, I saw, out of dozens and dozens of product managers, I saw 3 Black product managers that whole time. I used to think, and to a degree it is true, that technology was a great equalizer. I came out of school and I said, hey, I'm going to take the world by storm. I got all these jobs, and I was making mountains of money compared to what I was making before when I was working in sandwich shops in a temp agency, filing papers, filing away envelopes. So I thought I was living the life of Riley. But after a while, it turned out that all these articles and testimonies about widespread discrimination in Silicon Valley, even if you have those technical skills. So it's still a barrier there. And then Google, Facebook, and all these other companies after COVID, they've disbanded the diversity, equity, inclusion. And I used to hear these people making these smart remarks about merit. Some of these people were from like India and China. And what they didn't even understand or care about is that their government had sponsored them to be there in 2 ways. One is just getting them over there, but also what India did was that they made STEM education a priority. And so every school and every social class in India had STEM education because they wanted to make India a technology powerhouse. What the United States did was exactly the opposite. They kept money out of schools for minority populations that they didn't want to succeed. And then now we're lagging, and you go into every tech company in the IT division, who do you see there? And see, God is paying back some of that too, right? Because that's one of the consequences of treating people like this. Silicon Valley, again, there's these kind of soft discrimination where they look for not just technical capabilities and check marks on your resume, but do you fit with the culture? And that sounds good because, hey, you know, you want to teamwork and cohesive and all of that. But what it comes down to is, am I personally comfortable with you? Do I vibe with you? Are you one of me? That's what it comes down to. Are you like me or not? And that's a big consideration even in the Valley with all the technical skills that we can have. So another thing too is that it's costing, again, God is not mocked, it's costing this economy. That if Black wages had been for the past 20 years, and civil rights happened almost 80 years ago, but just the past 20 years, it would have added $16 trillion to the U.S. economy. So it's costing everybody, it's costing this whole nation. And the scripture here said, don't hold back the wages of some you have hired, not even for one night. It's Leviticus 19:13. People are supposed to be fair and equitable in how they pay, how they hire, how they promote, and so forth. Okay, voting rights. We're all familiar with this, I'm sure. Yeah, in Georgia, you can't give food and water to voters in line. I mean, what in the world is it going to undermine democracy to give somebody a bottle of water when they stand out in the hot sun waiting to vote? But they target this because they know that especially Black people had to stand in these long lines. Why? Because they shut down a lot of the voting places, and that's what they needed. So they don't attack things directly. They sound really neutral about it, but it targeted to impact certain populations that they don't want to make it or don't want to succeed. But what God says about it, and judgment is turned away backward, and justice stands afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity cannot enter. Along that line, just in 2023 alone, state legislators introduced 150 restrictive voting bills just in 1 year because the outcome of the election in 2020 didn't go the way they wanted it. And they're trying to seed it for the next time. Another thing, too, it's getting to where in Texas and Virginia, for instance, they want to overthrow elections even if a candidate wins. If they don't like the outcome, they want to overthrow the election. In Texas, at the government, the electors level, and then in Virginia, they want to empower a random selection of residents to overthrow the results of the election. And we can imagine how random that sample is going to be, right? Call my brother, call my daddy. What do you think? But that's the way it is. And these types of laws target certain people, and it's actual, real discrimination, not just things that people made up from Marxist philosophies. And it got so bad that the Supreme Court of this United States, packed by the former president, 6-3 conservative majority, very conservative, not just moderate, even they said, Alabama, enough, redraw these districts. And Alabama said, no, sir. So this is something that shows it is a systemic issue, and it's not just a whole bunch of black people discontented or discontented millionaires kneeling on football fields. Government policies. Leviticus 19:15, you must not pervert justice. You must not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the rich. You are to judge your neighbor fairly. Wikipedia has some good things in it, some things it's not as reliable, but this one is a good one. They have a list of expulsions, forced violent expulsions of African Americans in U.S. history. They've got a list of over 50 places and towns where African Americans have been forcibly expelled. Here's the ones that happened in the 19th century, in the 1800s, and here's the one that happened in the 20th century, 1900s. And there's more now, because what's happening is the interstate highways were used first to decimate black neighborhoods, and they were targeted. There was a place in, I think it was Florida, Mississippi, where the highway commissioner was a high leader in the Ku Klux Klan. So he targeted snaking that freeway through all the black neighborhoods he can. And again, Brother Rich was informing me that this happened in Atlanta too on Highway 85. It happened in Oakland. West Oakland used to be a nice, prosperous black area. They built a huge freeway through there, and now it's just messed up. And this happened all over the United States. Now, what's happening is that some places, and there's hope, in Christ there's always hope. There's some places that are trying to reverse some of this, at least a little bit. And in San Diego, they're trying to mend and get these neighborhoods back together again. Now, really, once this goes through your neighborhood, you're really not going to get it back together again. But at least the heart's in the right place, be able to make a bridge or something. But it's happening otherwise. Like, for instance, eminent domain is another area. And eminent domain is when the state or city or whatever can take your property without your permission and use it for whatever they want. This has been used to destroy black neighborhoods as well. So this is where, when I was going to school, I used to get my hair cut in a neighborhood like this. There was a little corner store there, and it was a really nice barbershop. Next door was a donut shop, and then across the street was a cleaners, and there was bakeries, and all these little nice small businesses that were there. And there was a corner store there, right? A liquor store, but more than that there. And so what they did was, and this was in East Palo Alto, and so what the Palo Alto residents did were like Facebook and all those people, is that they decided to start calling the place Whiskey Gulch. And they started talking about crime and all this. So what they did over time was get the support in the state government to build a Four Seasons. And right now, this is what it looks like. And that corner store and every business that was there is gone. And this happens routinely. And they ceded the city council. I mean, they didn't even lease it to them to give the city money. They sold it outright to the Sheraton Corporation. Sold off the city, and all of those people's businesses were destroyed. So government policies. Another one here, this is a recent one just from a year ago. Black taxpayers are more likely to face audits. And not only that, it says key points here, and this was in CNBC, is that they are significantly more likely to face an IRS audit. And part of this is because they defund the IRS so they don't have money to go after rich people, so they go after ordinary people. And disproportionate number of those ordinary people are African Americans. And of course, the commissioner, he's there in front of the Senate, says the agency has dedicated significant resources to address the disparity. We've got our best people working on it. And that's the story that they often try to tell. So it's not just there, it's the eminent domain which we study. And then this property seizure, back to the eminent domain, it's happening today. In South Carolina, they are stealing the Gullas and Geechee's land. And they're doing stuff, either doing it outright by rezoning an eminent domain, or they'll take their house because they didn't pay $250 to hook it up to the sewer, and they have an outhouse. So it's still going on. There is some of this that's changing. God always brings hope. In California, for instance, they have reparations that's going on. There's a beachfront property returned to a black family 100 years after it's seized. It was a Manhattan Beach in Southern California, and the land was returned to the family. It's worth $75 million. So there's some hope. In Christ, there's always hope. And then that is inspiring more black Americans to fight to get their land back. But Jesus said that the kingdom of God suffers violence and the violence take it by force. When Jesus comes back, we're going to be howdy howdy and everything will be all right. Today, in order to spread the gospel, but also to get what is coming, we have to fight for it. We're going to have to challenge these things, fight for these things, and the first thing is to be aware of them. And there's more. Redlining causes a lot of black homelessness. This one here, you will not replace us. We've all heard about this new replacement theory that some of these kind of people have, like these extremists have. They're afraid because people are coming into the country that don't look like them, and they're going to be outnumbered and lose their majority. And they say, you're not going to replace us. And so there's tactics that they use, like slowing down the mail, speeding up Supreme Court appointments. When Merrick Garland was, when Obama wanted a Supreme Court appointee, they never got to it. They never even decided with Merrick Garland, he never got it. As soon as Trump got in there and he started nominating these extreme conservatives, they fast-tracked every one of them and made sure they got them in there. So again, this is not neutral. And then things like shutting down polling places or just stop counting votes. So there's plenty of other things that we could talk about, but there's plenty of evidence for critical race theory observations. The key observations of critical race theory are very well founded, and there are tremendous numbers of examples. And sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, but we have to understand that progress is possible, and 1 plus God is the majority. And we'll get to this a little later here. There's also, in addition to these intentionally discriminatory things that are being done, there's neutral sounding policies that actually end up having racist outcomes. So one of these is, we've already talked about voter suppression laws. So they have these things, well, everybody can vote in this district, but they'll shut down some of them. Then bringing water to people being outlawed. Whereas God says, Psalm 33:5, he loves justice and fairness as he's kind to everyone, everywhere on earth. And he is the rock, and his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity, just and right is he. That's Deuteronomy 32:4. So in addition to government, there's industry. Artificial intelligence companies often don't take into consideration ethnic minorities. So for instance, self-driving cars don't recognize African-American pedestrians. Or AI that doesn't recognize black people as people, especially with puffy hair, they'll say, hey, this isn't a person, which is ridiculous. Another one is industry. Companies hiring from a short list of schools that few minorities go to. The company that Rich and I used to work together at did that. They hired at, quote, the top 20 schools, like there was no good students anywhere else. But what they did, and Silicon Valley does this all through, is that they let the schools do the discrimination for them. Because they know that people they don't want in their companies don't go to those schools, so those are the ones they recruit from. Another thing is policies like requiring college degrees for jobs that don't actually require college. And that's going to discriminate against people that have lower rate of college attendance. Education is a big one. These so-called IQ tests. There's no such thing as an IQ test, because nobody knows what intelligence is. They can't define it. So if you can't define it and you don't know what it is, you can't test for it. And you can't test on a piece of paper or punch in a computer screen, A, B, C, D. So they call it that. It's really a cultural acclimation test. And it can test some achievement, like can you do math or not? Can you interpret a sentence correctly and read through a document or a story and that kind of thing? But it cannot test intelligence. They use these tests for preferred high schools, like the SATs, ACTs, GMATs, and things. When I was at Berkeley, I worked in the admissions department. And I found out some things I didn't know, because I came from a regular old public school and graduated from Junction City High School in Junction City, Kansas. So when I went in there, I learned that they have these preferred schools. And Berkeley was a top school, still is. But anyway, they have these preferred schools, and they call them feeder schools. And these feeder schools actually have classes that prepare you for these SAT tests. And they will have teachers that will tell you, and they have sample tests of how to take. I didn't have any of that in the high school I went to. But these feeder schools do that, and then they come in and they score higher on the SATs and say that is merit. Not saying there's no merit involved, but it's not merit in the way that they're saying. And then same thing with people saying they're not smart enough to get to Harvard or Yale or whatever it is, but 25 to 50% of their admitted class is legacy donors because their daddies and mamas went there and donated something to the school or put a plaque on there or donated to a medical building. Another one is businesses, like promotions and hiring. You promote to management when all the supervisors are white and they just pick for this pool of supervisors. And then a lot of times referrals, and referrals are a good way to hire, but they can also have these unexpected side effects like bring your referrals. They're good people. We want to see good people, but who are people going to refer? Their friends, family members, people like them that they feel comfortable around. So this whole referral thing can have racist outcomes as well, even if it's not intended to. Justice, or lack thereof. In white-collar crime, as we've seen in all of these hearings that the former president is going through, you have to prove intent. Did you know it was illegal? Did you intend to defraud? All that sort of thing. But no-collar crime, the kind that we tend to get convicted for, it's ignorance of the law is no excuse. Different standards in the justice system for different people. Same thing with when they do this embezzlement of $100,000, $8 million, whatever. They get 2 years in jail and community service. Steal a car, it's 20 to life. That is systemic and it's intentional. And then another thing too, that is really personally distasteful is this club-fed prisons. So not only do they get 2 years for embezzling $10 million, but they get to stay in a club-fed prison that looks like an apartment. Their families could come see them, and they have these toys that they play with their kids. And where I was doing prison ministry, it was Santa Rita County Jail. It was a big fence and a little chapel in the middle of the big field, and that's it. And there were no toys. There were no visiting, conjugal visits and all this stuff. Those brothers and sisters, well, it was a men's prison. They had a lot tougher than this club fed. And they have alarm clocks. Santa Rita's there, but there's also Dublin. There's a federal prison there in Pleasanton. And they have alarm clocks. They have rooms with doors and alarm clocks. In Santa Rita, they have cages that open and close. So justice. Another one, too, is measuring only street crime in statistics. When white-collar, like domestic crime is prevalent. My wife and I drove up to Oregon one time, and never forget it, there was a store, went in the store, get some soda or something, and then there was a newspaper. So looked at the newspaper, it was a front page story. It was a little town in Oregon, I don't even remember the name, but it said about violent crime. And it said if domestic violence was considered in crime statistics, then our little Oregon town would have the highest violent crime rate in the United States. Just the way that they measure it and the metrics they create to measure things is geared toward, many times, discriminatory outcomes. Again, critical race theory is documented observation. It's not that's a whole bunch of discontented black folks throwing dust in the air. It's real. And laws and systems can be racist, not just individuals. They can be racist even if individuals don't intend them to be. And some of this comes from enculturated attitudes that all people have, that we just grow up with, and they can hurt people after they're eliminated, like redlining. Now, some of the objections, this won't be as long, but there's two main categories of objections to critical race theory. One is the one that we've probably all heard about, and this is these reactionary misinformation. It's Marxist, it's communist, it's racism and all that. This disinformation campaign. And if you notice, any time that there is thought that comes from the mainstream black community, and that doesn't mean like the Clarence Thomases and the Candace Owens and those people, but the mainstream black community that addresses, especially if it addresses racism in any way, especially systemic, there's always a disinformation campaign to link it with something evil and to link it with something bad. That happened with Black Lives Matter, violent terrorists. It happens with critical race theory now. It's racist, it's Marxist, it's this, that, and the other thing. And that's today, and they can try to excuse that, but they did the same thing to Martin Luther King. They called him a communist. They spied on his phone. They disparaged him in every way. Jerry Falwell, late Jerry Falwell, went all across the country, all these big-time evangelical preachers preaching against Martin Luther King. And then, when Civil Rights Act passed, over their dead bodies, fang and claw fighting them, then they danced on his grave and said, hey, we have overcome. Racism is gone. And it's not. Because they're doing the same thing now. And any time that thought comes out of the black community, there's going to be these racists that come up and try to disparage it, label it, and demonize it somehow. And that's what's happening in critical race theory now. Another one is thoughtful and considered arguments. Those are interesting, but they can also be a little harder to deal with, but also more dangerous in some ways. But at least they're thoughtful. We'll take a look at some of those. Now, as far as the reactionaries, we've all seen these sorts of folks saying it's racist and all of this, and there's some legislator up there saying, yeah, you guys are right, this is bad stuff. But here's a reality. A lot of the people that criticize critical race theory have no idea what it is. They don't understand it, they don't know. And this is just a selection of a couple YouTube videos, Ron DeSantis and Tucker Carlson, these people. And look at this guy up here. Critical race theory is poison. Really? What is it? I don't know, but it's poison. And so here are some of the common reactionary and racist objections to critical race theory. One is it's divisive. Well, Jesus said, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. When you're addressing evil, it's always going to be divisive to somebody, because everybody's not going to go along and say, yeah, we ought to repent of this and turn to the Lord and do things right. So yes, it's divisive, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if it's approached correctly. CRT is anti-white, it's racist. No, it's anti-injustice. And we've just looked through a ton of examples in every sphere of society proving that. It's anti-injustice. It makes white people feel guilty. Well, when I do wrong, I feel guilty. I don't see why that's a bad thing. But what Bible says is people that conceal their sins will not prosper, but if they confess and return from them, they will receive mercy. Famous scripture that we all know, right? If my people that are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and do what? What kind of ways? Then he'll do what? And do what else? Heal the land, right? This is what we need to do. And especially Christians in these evangelical churches with Franklin Graham and John MacArthur and all those guys, they need to repent. They need to feel guilty. If they do this evil and don't feel guilty, something's wrong with them. It's an excuse for lack of merit. And this is one that really, this makes you want to fight people, really. This is a slander that's thrown against black people all the time. You have to be twice as good, and then they feel that you're not even half as good. But they said the same thing again about Jesus Christ. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Can any good thing come out of these black communities with these black churches and whatever else? So we need to be able to address these, and they're not that hard to address. The major ones like this. And in Acts 5:28, here's what's really behind all of these objections. It's, did we not strictly command you that you should not teach in this name? Behold, you fill Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. These are the conservative leaders back then, the Pharisees. In other words, we don't like because you intend to hold us accountable for what we did. And you want to keep pointing it out. But that's really the dynamic from the scriptural perspective. That's the dynamic behind all of these reactionary and racist objections. And then when all else fails, there's slander. And this is a guy named Frank Turek. He's a YouTube guy, and he also goes around apologetics at colleges and things. And he is one of these people that preaches the word on one hand and denies it on the other hand. This is from his presentation about critical race theory. First of all, he's saying that it divides people into the oppressed and the oppressor. And the oppressor, in this case, is Christians. This is the middle one. And the oppressed is non-Christians. We're all impacted by all of these evils that we've shown. How many of us in here are non-Christians? Raise your hand. So for him to say the oppressor is Christians and the non-Christians, that's a lie. That's a lie from the pit of hell. So that is not even the point at all. And same thing, men as the oppressors and women and trans as the oppressed. That's a lie too. And critical race theory has nothing to do with any of that. It's not trying to point out Christians. It's just saying that these systems in society that people do, like this fella, that are wrong. Likewise, it has nothing to do with the owning class being the oppressor and the poor and middle class being the oppressed, other than driving freeways down people's houses, bulldoze down their neighborhoods, redlining their neighborhoods out, flattening out their barbershops and replacing with Four Seasons hotels. To that degree, yes. And same thing, abled versus disabled. I don't know where in the world he came with that kind of nonsense from, because that has nothing to do with critical race theory. So these things here are the way that they frame it, and it's a slanderous, misleading disinformation campaign to try to discredit and demonize a valid idea. And really what it is, it's that systems and rules, not people, are negatively impacting people of color, immigrants, indigenous people. And that's the reality of life, and that's what we've been seeing so far. Another thing is a Marxist thing. If you don't like it, call it Marxist. Now, how many people here, how many of us saints here, how many of us know any black communists? Anybody here? I have never met a black Marxist in my life, and I'm a little over 20 years old, and I never met one. I mean, I read about them, like the Black Panthers turned to communism because democracy wasn't working for them. Angela Davis, she said she was a Marxist, so that's about 55 people, right, out of 12, 30 million. So how in the world can Marxist thought come out of a community where there's no Marxists? So this is just a slander. And again, in the Bible, they did similar things. The Jews answered to Jesus and said, do we not rightly say you're a Samaritan and have a demon? And Samaritan was the N-word back then, so they would call him an N-word. And that's what it is. They were making up these false things that he wasn't doing. Just like with critical race theory here. And it's not the first time they've done it. This is before the Civil Rights Act was passed. Race mixing is communism. See, they've called communists, anytime something good is supposed to be happening, they call it communism. Jew communists behind race mixing. This isn't new. These are the same arguments that they've rehashed and invented and rehashed again and again and again. And it won't be the last time they do it. And here's the thing too, like they're saying communists infiltrate our churches and now it integrates our schools. So same thing happened in Bible times. So Pilate, the governor, went to them and said, what's your charge against this man? And they said, we wouldn't have handed it over to you if he wasn't a criminal. What'd he do? And the same thing here. What's the real problem with this? What's the problem with pointing this out? There's so much evidence and it happens every day. So what's the problem with saying it? So the bottom line to the reactionary objections is Titus 1:15. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their minds and consciences are defiled. That means that all of the evil that they're doing when they make these reactionary objections, calling it racist and all of this stuff, that's just a projection of their own selves onto us. And they're accusing us of being just like them. Now, some thoughtful objections. Come now, let us reason together. So there's some thoughtful people that will come up to objections to this. Though your sins be as scarlet, they'll be white as snow. So all people should be treated the same. That's a reasonable sounding objection. And overall, it would be okay if they weren't treated the same. But here's an example. Say somebody's getting paid $1,000 a day, somebody else getting paid $1 a day for the same job. Then suddenly somebody wakes up and has a conscience and say, wait, this is a $100 a day job. Everybody should get $100 a day. What's wrong with that? Well, this person's been getting $1,000 a day for this job for years and years. They've piled up a huge lead that this dollar a day person who's been incurring debt for years and years and years will never catch up. Treating everybody the same in that sense does not work. And then the Bible even says, whoever steals an ox or sheep, this is in Exodus 22:1, and slaughters it and sells it, steals it, must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. Don't just replace one for one because you have deprived this person and any of the benefit they could have gotten from the animal that you stole. Same idea here. Been deprived and piled all of this stuff up. Everyone treated the same in that way doesn't work. Another one is pro-poor policies, not race-based policies. Address poverty, and then that way the rising tide will disproportionately benefit people that have been disproportionately impacted. Sounds reasonable. But the problem is it's failed minorities, especially black people, every time it's tried. Another thing too is that the Gibeonites were wronged by Israel, and the Gibeonites were made right. When Saul attacked the Gibeonites, they didn't say, well, we're going to have a program for all Canaanites, and all Canaanites will benefit. No, the Gibeonites were wronged. The Gibeonites got retribution. And same thing, if black communities are wronged, black communities should be made right for it. Communities don't have the same rights as individuals. Well, that's not true either, because in Acts 6:1, the apostles organized to meet the Grecian widows' community needs. We saw the example in the beginning. Then also, we shouldn't have to pay for our ancestors' wrongs. Well, you're benefiting from them, for one thing. And then also, the Bible also says our ancestors sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. God said he would visit the consequences on the 3rd and 4th generation of the people who hate him. Those consequences come. And if they don't get paid willingly, they'll get paid unwillingly, because God is not mocked. So how should Christians respond? Come now, let us reason together. One thing is keep the gospel first. The one thing that we cannot do is get distracted from the gospel, because every advance that we made as a community has come with the gospel first. The civil rights movement was a church-based, gospel, faith-based, Jesus Christ-focused movement. So was abolition, to treat people the way the Bible said. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. Keep focused and beware of pitfalls. There's a thing called intersectionality, meaning that black issues especially, or minority issues, overlap with others, like women's issues. Like a person that is a black person and a woman has both of these issues to deal with. So that's legitimate. Black children, that's legitimate. But what happens is they'll do this intersectionality, and then appropriate, and then they deprioritize. Embrace, extend, extinguish means what will happen is that they'll extend it to other things, like LGBTQ. There's black trans and all that. If we don't focus on the black community first, then this dilution will take priority. even today in the news, where's the real priority? Since the 70s, since the free love and LGBT and all of that's happened and abortion and all this, there's been plenty of laws for that passed, but there haven't been any significant civil rights laws for people of color. We cannot allow them to dilute our focus on this. Biblical intersectionality, women, that makes a lot of sense because women are saints. And unbiblical sexuality, we'll just cover both of those. So remember, saints, that this is a spiritual marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not going to be over in a day. It took us 400 years to get where we are, and it's not going to be solved overnight. So as Hebrews 12 said, we have a great cloud of witnesses before us, all the people that came before us on this journey, on this road, fighting this fight. Let us run with patience the race that is set before us. And faith without works is dead. That's another thing. We need to be active, to be talking about this, to be taking action, to vote, to do whatever we can to try to make change happen. Because if we don't fight for it, it's not going to happen. And then as far as what it is for critical race theory itself, to understand it's not Marxism, that it's based on all this evidence and that there's core principles to it that are reasonable and that actually are true. I understand this documented reality of research. Like if you want this presentation, you're welcome to it, make it available. Then that can be a starting point for scripture foundation and for evidence foundation for your own research and work, Lord so wills. Underline the scripture support. They haven't read all the scriptures that were there, but every point that we made has a scriptural example of how people behaved the same way back in Bible days. Don't be distracted by all these attacks. Stay focused on the goal and don't be discouraged. Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. So it is accurate, scriptural. If we just look at it in racial terms and not other terms, it's not LGBT or anti-Christian or Marxist. Laws and rules and systems can be racist, not just individuals as we've seen. Laws and systems can be racist, even if individuals who make them don't intend them to be. And they can hurt people long after they're eliminated. So we need to try to focus on correcting that as well as getting rid of remaining rules that are racist in that regard. And do it for her. Praise God.
Pastor Ash, as far as the different systems, what do you think on the topic of not teaching Black history schools and the different laws that have been passed?
I think that's another one of these demonic attacks, that if you can cut off the head, then the body is aimless. And Black history is important because that's where we can do it through our families, and that's the most accurate way to do it, frankly. But if it's not taught in schools, then two things will happen. One is that we'll lose the history, a lot of the history that could be taught in schools. But secondly, more importantly, is the people that are doing this will never have a conscience about it. They'll never have an awareness. I grew up in the days of like John Wayne and that stuff. A lot of the things that I've learned about Black history and all of the, like Tulsa and all of that, I wasn't taught that in school. I didn't know. And more importantly, I think the people who did this didn't know. Like there were white students that were telling me, go back to Africa. Well, I didn't know that we built this country. I could have said, no, I built this country. I belong here. You go back to Europe. So it's good for both us, our community. It's also good for other communities to see not only the struggles, but the accomplishments. The many Black scientists, like Latimer Lewis invented the stoplight, or George Washington Carver with all these things that he did, hundreds and hundreds of different products. And there was a guy who was the manager for a Microsoft operating system. And who knows about those sorts of things? Colin Powell, General of the Army, Chairman of the George Teacher Staff, Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice. These people need to be seen and they need to be known about so other people will respect us. So I think it's a travesty. And it's a continuation of trying to continue these sorts of things that we've been fighting against, that we've been talking about this morning.
Pastor Ash, one of the things that you mentioned Condoleezza Rice. I found out in researching Condoleezza that she was from western Alabama, right close to Mississippi, where I'm from.
Yeah, okay.
And found out that her grandmother was a head.
All right then.
Ain't that something?
Praise the Lord. That's a good thing. All right.
No, but just in all earnestness, one of the things I do work on, wonder about how to fix it. Mm-hmm. I'm a kind of a solution-driven person. I want to fix it. I want to make sure it gets right. And when it comes down to what instruments can we use to actually combat this or educate people to a point? I appreciate you being here from California, but the research you've done is exceptional. But how do we get local people, local communities, local government, school systems to actually embrace wisdom and knowledge, as you've stated? One of my big asks of the school system in Gwinnett County is that we put civics back in the classroom. We are void of civics for about 2 generations now. Kids graduate from school. They don't know how to do government, so whatever is handed down to them is what's handed down, and it's not taught in the classroom. So your views on that, please.
I think part of it is to get involved in the system and to start pushing for even things like running for elected office, right? If it's a city council, to get together, support somebody, and put them on the city council. Do petitions for things that are important, for the community. There was a thing that we did, and it was encouraging. There was a huge Masonic home like that's right behind our house. They're on top of a hill. And they were trusted with a grant, a land grant, and they wanted to start doing development on it, like to build housing and stuff. And we fought that as a neighborhood and defeated it twice. There was when I was in the AME church that I was in, that was real close to our house. It was like across the street, and there was a vacant lot, there was a gas station. There was a city ordinance there where they wanted to allow this, they wanted to start selling cigarettes, right? And there was a city ordinance that said you could not sell cigarettes within 1,000 feet of a church. So they wanted to overturn that. So we fought it. And we, in that case, got a very important partial, mostly victory, meaning that the city council ended up and even the city planners were on our side, but the city council was being influenced by the guy that had the gas station, and he was threatening to pull out and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, what happened was that they ended up having a compromise that there were only like 9 lots in the whole city, and that only gas stations would be allowed to sell these cigarettes, right? So they would not be able to proliferate cigarette sales, especially with these flavored cigarettes, the candy kind that hook kids, right? That's what we were really pushing. And we ended up, in that case, getting a partial victory, right? Half a loaf is better than no loaf. Another thing, too, that we should carefully consider is there was William Gray. He was a representative. He spoke to our class one time. He was a representative out of Philadelphia. And he said that what the private sector doesn't understand is that politics is the art of getting half a loaf. And a lot of times when we're negotiating, especially with someone with different interests, not necessarily hostile, we may not get everything we want. But what we need to do is to learn to negotiate for the things that are most important. So like, for instance, negotiation classes, what you learn is that you come in with a core, you prepare, and same thing with these city council meetings. We don't want to just go there and start talking, out of our emotions. We want to go there prepared, right? Go there prepared with a plan, and then have a list of things that are non-negotiable. And then you have other things that are negotiable. And what happens is that you end up negotiating away some of the negotiable things, but you retain your non-negotiable. And then another thing is to understand what is it that our sometimes opponents or whoever we're trying to address is trying to accomplish. What is their interests? And if we understand what their interests are, then we can figure out ways, how can they get most of what the important thing they want, and we can get the most important things we want. So we need to be a lot more strategic. And right now, I think that a lot of what we do is emotion-based, and it's effective temporarily to a degree. Like when George Floyd was murdered, that had some changes, but it didn't have long-term systemic changes that we would want. And part of that has to do with being strategic. When they wiped out this neighborhood where a barbershop used to be, they did that over a period of several years, right? They were planning, and they went and they went behind the scenes. And Rich knows about this because he's in high levels, strategic sales. And strategic sales, you have to identify who are the stakeholders, who's the executive decision maker, the one that says yes or no, who are the advisors, who are all the critical parties that we need to do. And a lot of what we want to accomplish is extremely complex, and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved. So we need to have people who understand what do these people want, what are their influences, what are their agendas, and work alongside that, within that, to try to get as much of what we can as we can. And over time, what happens is that it's the power of incremental gains. It's sort of like compound interest, right? First of all, you get 5%, and then you get 5%. Now you got 105%. Then you get 5% of that 105%, and then over time it builds up. And so these people are playing the long game, and we need to play the long game too. And a lot of that is like information like this. Like, you could utilize this presentation if you wanted to. Put your name on it, add your own material, take my picture off the back. You don't have to advertise my YouTube channel if you don't want to. But use these types of materials as starting points. and see how they can be put together for things that are more local. And start small. Once you get those local victories, then you start accumulating a track record, but also you accumulate confidence and experience, right? And it's that experience over time that really swells up into big victories.
Pastor Ash, I'm curious of your take on DEI. You kind of touched on some of this, but you know, a lot of times DEI can be a facade, right? Because then you got the scientist, he's passing signing a bill where they're abandoning DEI initiatives in public colleges, and then obviously you got these companies saying that they have these DEI initiatives, and you kind of talked on, yeah, you may have that now, but that doesn't right the wrong that has happened for so many years. So I'm just curious of your take.
That's a good question. There's a couple things. One is that DEI is like a couple slices. So you either get a couple of slices of bread or you get nothing, right? So it's a start. And what happens is that in every industry, and this is the power of Atlanta, is that now we've got, whatever we think of him, he's kind of off track sometimes, Tyler Perry. But you start with a door, you start with a crack. And what they want to do is they want to close that crack, so we can't even get a foothold, right? DEI is important because it gives a public face to something, and yeah, it can be a facade. But the fact is that if you get enough people in through this facade, some of them will rise higher into organization, and you gain a critical mass. Without that DEI, it's a lot harder to get started, and that's why. And another thing too. One way to tell what's effective is what are they trying to cancel. If DEI was truly ineffective, it was truly a facade, they would not try to cancel it.
Just a question. And just one thing I didn't see, and I think a lot of this impetus to around critical race theory, DEI, et cetera, I think a lot of it is brought on by the youth of today. Putting pressure on their parents, because now they're looking at photos that, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, hey, that was grandma and grandpa, but now you have great-grandchildren saying, hey, why is grandma and grandpa in this picture of a lynching? Or, here's a great one, Jerry Jones. You're front and center for a little black child that just wanted to go to school.
Yeah.
But you're at the front of that group. And now you have to explain that. And see, these people that have to make that explanation, those are the people that are in power now. So I saw one slide where you said it's their guilt, but is it their kids that is instilling that guilt on them?
Yeah.
Because they just don't see it the same. Yeah, I look at my daughter, she's 26. Her circle of friends looks nothing like what my circle of friends look like at 26.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And the thing is, well, we'll take guilt wherever we can get it in that sense. I don't want to be too glib about that. But basically, there are different channels through where people get a conscience. And sometimes their children can reach them when we can't, right? So that's a good thing. And wherever God can use people to reach people, to soften their hearts a little bit, that's always a good thing. And it may not be from directions that we always want or think or anticipate, but the fact that it's happening is a blessing.
Pastor, do you think that America has lost its consciousness?
What kind of consciousness?
Spiritual consciousness. Because as Derek was just talking, I remember when I was probably in my 20s, just entering into my 20s, we had the hippie movement. And I think the hippie movement, if you will, in New York and the drugs or all the, love, fest, peace and everything else was just a retaliation or consciousness of a white America saying, we're hypocrites. And so they started to rebel against their parents, and even they were treated roughly.
Yes.
Didn't get them out of the club, but they did treat them roughly.
Yeah, Kent State Massacre and that kind of thing, yeah.
Can you say a word about that? I mean, again, I just think that America has somewhere along the way lost its reasonable spiritual consciousness.
Yes, I think that is true, that America is losing its spiritual consciousness. But that could be an opportunity in that as well, to what you were sharing about what can we do locally. One of the things I noticed, like there's declining Christianity. And it's not just black churches, white churches, all churches here, except the immigrant churches, right? They're African churches are booming, Mexican churches, so forth. Now, a large part of that is just what you're saying, is that people see hypocrisy. They're not blind. And so one of the things that I've seen in these brochures, like these evangelical organizations, they'll send these brochures out, declining church participation, why Christianity is declining in America, blah, blah, blah. And you look through those answers, And it's always, secularism, this, that, and the other thing. But what they're always missing is racism, bigotry. And that is one of the biggest things. If we look at those, like the YouTube, they have all of these why I left Christianity type of videos, these testimonials all over the place. Listen to a number of them. And one of the things a lot of them have to do is how hypocritical people are in churches about race. They're racist, and they also throw in LGBTQ and stuff, but we don't have to do that because that's not biblical. But what is biblical is racism needs to be addressed. And so we should also maybe reach out to some of these pastors and help them understand that, look, these books you're writing about why people are leaving, that's not the whole story. And if you don't help us address racism, it's hurting you now. God is not mocked. People are leaving churches because of this hypocrisy around race, about the backlash against the George Floyd protests, and all the demonization of critical race theory and all that stuff is driving people out of church. Young white kids, their children, right? So, and it's impacting black churches too. That's one way, perhaps, at least for some. It's going to be hard because there weren't many Pharisees who followed Jesus. And the Pharisees were the religious conservatives in the Bible days. The religious conservatives today are the Pharisees of today. Different location, different ethnicity, but it's the same thing. So there may not be many, but there's some out there, and helping them understand this stuff is driving your members out of the church could help wake some of them up. It's going to be a hard road, but it's possible. And the thing is that all we need to do is to get one or two of the right people. We may not convince one, but God did a lot with those 7,000 and that Elijah was talking about. And it's the same thing here. If we can find those 7,000 and help them understand, especially the Christians, and help them understand that this is one reason that church attendance is declining for everybody. You help us fix this, and we can at least stem the flow.
Hey, Pastor, what are some things we can do today to start taking some steps towards racial discriminations in our institutions, whether it be schools, communities, place of employment?
Take some of this information and think about where it is that two things. One is where is it happening in schools and employment? So there's these, take schools, for example. Talk to people, newspapers, whatever it is, online research, what's going on if there's incidents like this in school. Parents associations, mix with other parents. See what kind of experiences they're having. Share the experiences that you're having. Because what happens is that a lot of times we think we're suffering alone, but we're not. There's other people that are going through the same thing. So that is one thing. In terms of jobs, it's an advocacy. You have to cultivate advocates. You find the people who are open and friendly towards these issues and start cultivating with them as what we can do in the company to improve things in the company. Like we want to bring more black scientists in or whatever, employees of whatever kind, or, Latino employees, whatever, is to work with advocates. That's what happened with us at GE. They had actually advocates for each type of different group in the company. And they had an executive sponsor for that. If you can get that to happen, great. If you can't get it to happen, what you do is you work with people at the level below them or below, they can percolate up and build relationships. That's a long game because you need to build relationships with people and then find the people that are more sensitive to this subject and then start casually figuring out what we can do. And have a plan in terms of your own experience and then work with them to try to put together something that can work in the company's framework. Then it just start with one at a time. And that's sort of the idea. It varies, exactly how you do it will vary from company to company, but the basic principle is you find advocates in the company that are sensitive to the issue and empathetic to the issue, and then you start working with them to see how you can address it in your company. And just starting that first step can end opening possibilities that you wouldn't even know. With school boards, attend school board meetings. That's another thing too. Be active in the parent-teachers associations because the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And you find out what's going on and you live in that, and your voice will be heard if you repeat it enough. And again, think in terms of small victories. Sometimes you can say, okay, I may not be able to tackle this big influx, but maybe we can get one person through the door. Or in the school system, you can say, okay, we may not be able to address like the discipline problem, but let's take this one case of a student that was unfairly disciplined and hammer on it. A lot of times you can do that and they'll get the message elsewhere and things will tamper down some. And another thing too is voting. That's important. Vote in every election. Volunteer maybe if you can, like in a voting poll, to see how that whole process works. And then from there you can try to make changes. See who the players are. That's a real thing no matter which area that you're in, is to learn who the players players are. Learn what their agendas are, learn what their history is, learn what's more important to them. And sometimes it's not just on a business or school academic level, it may be on a personal level. I actually lost a contract for a company, for a company I was working on. As kind of a shameful admission. But I kind of had it nailed because like one of the key executive decision makers for this big contract was a jazz fan. And I happened to be, my wife and I were going to be traveling out to Switzerland to go to the Montreux Jazz Festival. He lived in Switzerland and we were going to hook up, tour the winery and all that sort of stuff. And I blew it, right? I flaked out at the last minute, something, and it screwed up. And it turned out he was the one that ended up being the key decision maker for the contract, and we lost the contract because of me. But at the same time, to turn that around, you find out who these decision makers are, what they want, and on a personal level, you might have something in common with them that can break ice. You can write 100 proposals, but if you know that your kid likes soccer or building robots or whatever, and their kid likes soccer and building robots, that can make something really special happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. One of the things that used to be true, and I don't know how true that is in Atlanta, is that a lot of times what was noticed is that like the black employees at companies that I was working on, they wouldn't go to the after work events. They want to go home. I'm just here working with them. I'm going home. But they didn't realize how much career progression happens that way. Not because you're out there like brown nosing, but because you build relationships with people. They learn to trust you and you get to like them. There was a vice president at the company, Richard, I worked, that really helped me understand these, because I was complaining one day about work, and he said, look, incorporate work into your life. So what I started doing is taking my wife on business trips, and we'd take scheduled vacations for a few days. So don't overlook the personal side of it too. There's going to be this official side where you go through the processes and steps and stuff, but there's also going to be a personal side where you build personal relationships with people, and that can get stuff done that they would never do officially. And look for that at each one of those areas that you're concerned about, and pick one to start. If you pick one, you get experience and you don't dilute yourself too much. The one that you're most passionate about, that you feel that you can be the most effective in, and start there.
I have a mic.
Okay.
A few years ago, I lost my job because I was board of city council, and I wound up having to sue the Beaufort City Schools. I still attend the meeting, but I can't get people to come out and attend, and there's a lot of things that people need to know. I don't know how to go about getting people involved, because they started out right after it happened.
Mm-hmm.
After things happened, they started out coming, but now they're not coming, but a lot of things are happening. We've had property taken by eminent domain.
Wow.
They had a proposal last time I was there. They are proposing that people that when they turn 65 years old won't have to pay taxes anymore, which is great. But they're also proposing that people that have $500,000 or more won't have to pay taxes for the city of Beaufort.
Mm.
But most people don't have the $500,000 homes. And we need to, people need to know whenever that time comes, they can fight it. I don't know how to get people's attention. They'll call me and talk to me personally, but they won't go and attend the meetings, or they won't be there to stand with me. I don't know what to do.
Okay. With that, I think I could recommend is to try to pick your battles with your people, so that among that number, there's hopefully one of them that gets excited about something, and pick maybe one thing that you want them to attend, something that they can see impacts them. Another thing too is, and this goes back to the whole workplace and voting, everything else, is think about what's in it for them. That's the way people operate. What's in it for me? So if you can come up with something that's what's in it for them, either in terms of a loss that they're going to suffer, or in terms of some kind of gain that they want, then there's a higher chance of getting them out. And another thing too, even though you may not be able to get them to every meeting, maybe you can get them to come to one, and that meeting has to do with this one thing that they're really concerned about. So hopefully that can help. But sometimes you just can't get anybody to do anything. I mean, that's possible too, I hope not. But to the degree that somebody has a thoughtful life in terms of thinking about these sorts of things, find out what each person is passionate about, that that you want to do something. And some of them you may just have to write off. And then others, if they've gone to a meeting before, that's a decent starting point for getting them to come to at least one meeting in the future. There'd be some detective work though.
Well, we're right at time.
Right.
Speaking
Thank you.
of